You're about to listen to an episode of the Leadership Melting Pot podcast, brought to you by Lumerous. Engage with us as we dissect an aspect of leadership and see how you may apply some of what is shared across your business.
You're about to listen to part one of a two-part series featuring phenomenal Black women in leadership roles. You'll hear the voice of our host, Romeo Fs, as he engaged three Black women in leadership on their thoughts and experiences as Black women leaders in the spaces that they occupy. Our co-host, Precious Luwanga, who also shared her experiences in leadership, joined Romeo in fruitful discussion with guests Rasheen Roper Robinson and Neka Orji. This episode was done in observation and celebration of Black History Month in October for the UK.
Welcome everyone to yet another episode of the Leadership Melting Pot. My name is Romeo Fs. I am the CEO here at Lumerous, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Precious. Thank you, Romeo. I'm Romeo's co-host today. I'm Precious Luwanga, and I'm also a member of the Lumerous Academy, Leadership Academy. I'm a cost and commercial expert, and brilliant to be here with you, Romeo.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it'll be a good one today. So today we've got two amazing women as guests. Our first guest is Neka. Neka Orji is a financial services expert, and she currently works in the financial services sector. Really impressive, actually, when I was reading this, Neka, that you were seconded as a chief of staff to Deloitte UK chairman. So we might probe a little bit on that.
Yeah.
Our second guest who will be joining us shortly is Rasheen Robinson. She's actually out in Jamaica at the moment, and she works in education, particularly in student development at the University of West Indies. She works in student services, and part of what she does is really working with young students, and just supporting them in their careers. So again, we'll get to know a little bit more about what Rasheen's doing in that leadership role in education.
Yeah.
So over to you, Romeo.
I mean, today is going to be, as I said, it's going to be super excited. We'll be discussing and dissecting the matter of Black women in leadership. As most of you know that this month, October, is Black History Month here in the UK. And, we're going to be looking at the impact of leadership on Black women, and also the impact of Black women on leadership in general, and just kind of having a chat with our guest in terms of, in their roles as Black women and leaders, how they've kind of traversed the leadership landscape and environment, especially in a place where leadership is seen as pretty much male dominated. And Precious, you're not just here as a host as well. You're actually here as a Black leader in your own right, running your own business, having worked in senior leadership. But
Absolutely.
Earlier on you spoke about Neka being the chief of staff for the chairman of Deloitte, but Neka was also COO of a major financial institution, right? With a huge team. Exactly, right? So
hats off, Neka. Hats off.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I thought you should.
No, not at all. I think Romeo's just trying to big me up, but thanks.
you gotta big up. They say the research shows that if and this is across women and men generally, that if a woman sees a job description and there are 10 items on it, if she has 8 or 9, if one is missing, she's like, no, I'm sorry, I can't go for this job. But a man, if we have 3 or 2, we're blagging our way through the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
Do you know that is an absolute true story. I mean, love to hear from Neka about that, actually, because You know, they
Yeah.
say they say we sell ourselves short all the
Yeah.
time. And what's your take on that? Because I think, it's actually a good discussion point whilst we, segue into leadership, because part of that is actually seeing yourself as a leader in some of those instances. So
Yeah.
let
Yeah. No,
yeah, what
definitely. I definitely completely resonate with that. You always see like exciting roles, opportunities. It might not even just be in a job. It might be, I don't know, I remember when I applied to be a school governor, and I never would have done that because I was like, I have no relevant experience. But actually, one of my former university colleagues was like, no, just do it. So you've got like relevant experience and so on. So I definitely get that sense of, oh, I'm not sure I'm quite ready. But that's what actually motivates me. It sounds very strange, but for
Yeah.
me, once I see like actually I don't know everything, and I might go into the room and I might learn something, or I might be, there's a slight imposter syndrome piece as well.
mm,
But that
mm,
means for me, I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, actually, that means I'm going to grow. And that for me
mm,
is amazing
Mm.
because I know myself when I'm in roles where, I know what to do already. I get bored. I'm not sure I'm developing. And for me,
yeah,
a job
yeah,
isn't just a job. It's about actually learning to do things. And as long as I need to have some substance going into a role, because some people are comfortable blagging. Those people who can
mm,
just constantly spew hot air and they're very
Yeah.
comfortable with that. That's that's not me. But at the
yeah,
same time, I need to make sure that if I see a role with 100% of things that I can do, that means it's probably not a role I can grow into and develop. So that's how I
mm,
see it, as an opportunity to grow.
mm.
That's a good take.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, okay, I'll speak slightly, I suppose, complete opposite end of the scale. So that's me now
Mm,
in a role where I'm now comfortable with myself. I see myself as a leader. But
mm.
that wasn't myself probably like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You'd look at what Romeo just mentioned would exactly be the scenario. I would look at it and say that role, I want it so badly, but I don't think
Mm,
I can actually do it. But
yeah.
actually, the guys go in it and they've sorry, Romeo, but the guys go in it, and like Romeo said, they've got three out of the six, 3 out of the 10 essential skills, and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
job. So
Yeah.
now, what you've just mentioned, Necker, about growth, I think that's where I am now, where everything that I'm doing now needs to be about growth. So it's great that
Mm.
you're in this position, but was it like that before?
Yeah, and that's such a good point. I think I'm by no means a finished product, but I'm definitely an evolution of what I was when I started my career 12 years ago.
Mm.
I definitely wasn't looking out for roles that were going to stretch me, or I'd see gaps and I could learn from them. I actually thought, there are a number of roles. Even we talked about the chief of staff role. I was like, oh, I'm so terrified. Why did I say I was interested in this role? I have no idea what I'm doing. And at the time, chief of staff roles weren't that available. They were quite
Mm,
like they were used in the military, and there were some
Yeah.
chief of staff or executive assistant roles in the big corporates, but definitely in the big four, they were still relatively new.
mm,
So I was just terrified. I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to fail in this. Everyone is looking at me as well because I was fairly young slash
Yeah.
junior to have taken on that particular chief of staff role. So no, this was not me 12 years ago, or actually at various points during that 12 years. But what I have learned, or what I take comfort in, is that actually lots of the people in the senior roles are actually just working it out themselves.
right,
People who look
right.
really comfortable and confident,
Definitely.
like, but they're actually all working it out. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
leadership is never like, there's never a clear answer. You move into a different scenario, different business. You have to
Yeah.
work things out. It's human beings that you're dealing
yeah.
with, and we're all so complicated and different. So it's been a journey. It's a massive
Mm,
journey that I've
What,
gone through.
what would you tell your younger self though? Like if you had the opportunity to go back maybe like 10 years or so, when you like just started in corporate, like what are some of the things you'd say to your younger self? I mean, I knew I would just
Yeah.
slap myself and say, look, just calm down. Like
Yeah.
calm down, Mildred, but
Uh, I'm not I'm not trying to slap myself. I think my younger self was just like trying to figure it out, and also to really be comfortable in my own skin.
mm,
So the thing I always say that I would have told myself is that I didn't have to work as hard as I did. I felt like I had to
Exactly.
show and put in all the extra work. And at the
Yes.
time, it seemed like there was no option. This is the only
Mm,
thing I had to put in 120% to
Yes.
demonstrate that I deserved that role or I
Yeah.
deserved that promotion. Because there'd be some comments around, oh, yeah, they're really promoting women now, or they're really into
yes.
diversity. Isn't it great? I'd sit there thinking, well, at least I can show that I was in the office first and I was the last out of the office.
Oh,
But
don't live
actually,
that. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that was that's the thing. I look back now, I'm like, you could have done probably 60-70% and gotten the same outcome. You didn't need to put so much in it. I don't regret it because
Yeah.
I learned so much in that journey or throughout that journey, but that's the one thing I would definitely tell my younger self.
Good, good. Rasheen, are you hearing us now?
I am hearing you. I'm seeing everybody. I am here with you.
Perfect.
And really
Thank you.
just want to I want to apologize for all the gymnastics just now, you know.
I
That's all
Um
mean,
right.
we've got to have some excitement, right?
Yeah.
I'm I don't know. And I mean, if we're being honest, I find leadership can be like that, and we have to a huge part of what that is how you respond to all of what is happening.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's crazy. We had a great no nonsense tech check earlier, and then all the things for me to sign in a while ago. But I'm here.
But
Thank you.
the good thing is that you solved it, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what we
yeah,
do,
yeah.
right? We solved it. We were just having a conversation with Necker about you know 10 years versus now,
Uh-huh.
and what was her experience like, maybe when she was much younger, just starting
Mm.
out on this journey,
Yeah.
in corporate, compared to where she's now. And we'd probably love to kind of hear your views in terms of
Yeah.
like when you started versus now, and what are some of the things you'd say to your younger self?
Oh, well, I mean, 10 years ago, I was much more, I feel like much more silent, much more quiet
Mm.
about my ideas, my thoughts on things, my opinions. When I disagreed with a way forward or a notion about how things should be done, um, I would certainly keep quiet about it. I was a lot less inclined to ruffle any feathers.
Mm.
If I felt like I was going to be seen in a negative light. And to an extent, there is some of that that still lingers, but it is way less leading at this
Hmm.
time in my life,
Yes.
10 years later, at 36 years old. And so what I'd say to my younger self, though, is that it's seasonal and you're not going to stay there. Keep reading, keep
Mm.
listening to the leadership podcast, keep engaging with persons who are, um, within that space, persons who have gone through a gamut of experiences within different spaces,
Mm.
and trust your growth and trust that the things that you're going to go through are going to take you to places that will blow your mind, and
Mm.
don't be afraid of that. I think is what I'd readily say right now. I'm sure if I think a little
Yeah.
more, I'd say
Uh,
so, but yeah.
there was a huge study done years ago, and by Harvard University. We'll put the link to it further down, and they spoke about this thing called executive presence, right?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
they said executive presence was actually created back in the industrial age, when businesses were run by men, right?
Mm.
So so when women come into the workplace, they are actually, the pressure is put on them to behave in
Yeah.
that kind of a way from a leadership perspective,
Mhm.
because it's how men had constructed all of that, in terms of women needs to behave this way, they need to dress a
Mhm.
certain way. It's when women used to power dress. I don't remember if back in those days when women used
Oh,
to wear the black suit and the black pants, and
let me
and all
tell
that.
you.
But I mean, as very successful leaders, women leaders, and black women leaders in particular in the workplace, like what were some of your experiences trying to maneuver that whole space though?
You want to open a can of worms?
Yeah.
I'm a woman. I'm a woman in construction. So you're talking about the
Wow.
structures that were created in the industrial. time. And now that still exists to an extent in construction. Those
Mm.
structures have not been broken at all. And just
Mm.
just just listening to what Rasheen and Neka said about looking at themselves 10 years ago, there's still elements of that where you now had to own your own identity as a leader. So I think what you just said, Romeo, about the structures, absolutely, the structures were a massive barrier in terms of women, especially particularly Black women. I'll speak as a Black woman in construction, actually finding your identity, because when you are different to what everything looks like, one, you have the color of your skin, two, you have the
Mm.
fact that you want to wear heels and maybe a skirt, and there's wolf whistling on site. It's a conundrum. It's like you are going through a maze every day of, okay, who am I, what am I here for? And once you get
Yeah.
through that barrier of, I am precious and I am here to do whatever I need to do and boss this site
Mm.
out, do you know what I mean? In the nicest of terms.
Mm.
So those structures are still there, and I think with anybody that is going through this process of leadership is really understanding who you are and
Mm.
Yeah.
actually just embracing who you are first, and then saying, how am I going to actually lead in this environment? Because when you don't know who you are, you can really get swallowed. And
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rasheen touched on it early on, like feeling like, I don't want to be seen, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. That's natural very early on in your career. But as you
Yeah.
progress, really is that you have to have an honest conversation and say, how am I going to lead as self? And I had to have that conversation probably about 7 years ago. I said, I know where I want to go. I might ruffle some feathers, but
Yeah.
I need to lead with self first. If I'm leading myself, but yeah,
Mm.
I'll leave it to Neka and Rasheen just to add on that, given the fact that you're different sectors as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what everything that you say is exactly right. I think I was really lucky in the sense that when I was younger, my parents used to say you'll never fit in, and it was quite a harsh message for like
Mm,
a child. But actually, what they were trying to say
Yeah.
is you are you. Like, there's no point trying to
Mm.
fit a mold, no point trying to be someone else. And
mm,
I learned that very early on. And I remember my very first role in consulting. I remember it was probably 9 months in, we were doing sort of performance rounds, and one of the senior managers said to me, what you need to be is a bit more like, he pointed to two guys who were on the program.
Mm.
These guys were constantly getting drunk with the senior MDs. And I
mm,
just thought, this is
Mhm.
never
Mhm.
going to be me. Like, never. There were so
Yeah.
many aspects of their values, their behaviors,
mm,
that I just knew I would either choose to go that way and lose myself, or choose to be me. It
Yeah.
was not going to be, and for me, I didn't want to compromise who I was. I
Yeah.
think that it's too important for me to be true to my values, to my sense of authenticity. So
mm,
I was lucky I had that realization really early on, in terms of childhood, in terms of framing that within my mind, but also in my first role. And I made the decision then. I was like, it might be a harder journey to be
Yeah.
authentically me, but that's the choice
Yeah.
I'm going to make, because I'd rather have a slightly harder journey on that sort of route to leadership.
Yeah.
But when I arrive, I'm myself, rather than being a sellout and then not
mm, mm,
knowing how to use my voice, or using my
Mhm.
platform to say give a
Yes.
completely contradictory message to my values. So I
Yes.
think I made a very conscious decision at that point. And sometimes I think about the conversations I've had, but I've just been so lucky to have a really strong support network and so on,
mm,
that have encouraged me and
Mhm.
supported me by the side, on the sidelines, to have those slightly more challenging conversations to make sure that I stuck to what I believed. And yeah,
mm,
that remains true today. Leadership can be sort of a generic concept, but
Mm-hmm.
every
Mm-hmm.
leader needs to choose what type of leader they want to be.
yeah,
That's
Yes.
it.
And if you're
absolutely.
trying to emulate someone else, there are aspects you can take from people, and that's great, but you need to decide who you are as a leader, or who you want to be.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm, mm,
Rasheen, I see you
Yeah. I
nodding.
mean, yeah, no, no. A lot of what Nika has said resonates with me. And I know that because my foray into leadership came very early. I was always a leader from high school coming up. I'm not sure what you call it, where you are all
It's,
from.
it's, it's the
But I
same
would,
it's the same
it's the
structure,
same
Tiffany.
concept.
It's the
Prefect.
it's the colonial, the benefit of
Prefect, yes,
colonialism.
yes,
Yeah.
prefect, this, that, right, fine. And so you know where I'm coming from. So I was prefect and head girl, and then coming into university, getting into student leadership there, and so on and so forth. And I struggled quite a bit with the kind of leader I wanted to be. You know, I initially had this idea that as a leader, like you had to be aggressive and you must be forceful. You have to be someone that people fear so that you can get things done and
Mm.
change can occur.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to come into, and then grappling with that. And as a person, that's not who I am. It would have been
Mm.
fine if, as a person, I am aggressive.
Yeah.
As a person, I'm, like no nonsense and just really firm and bring the hammer down, and that's my thing. But as a person, I was never like that. And I think,
Mm.
and even as I continue to travel, and continue to navigate leadership, I think I've come into a greater sense of who I am as a person,
Mm.
because that is, the person is who is leading. And
Yeah.
so I'm not interested in diverting or departing at all from my core values,
Mm.
and yeah, so that's where I definitely underscore what you're saying, Nico, and Precious, about knowing who I am and
Mhm.
leading as such. And I
But
think
but
that there's immense value in that.
Mm.
but I mean, listeners, we didn't plan it this way, but we have three three black women on the panel right now. They are all wearing natural hair, which is I am I'm loving this because like I just love that completely,
Great.
right? And it just struck me that everyone talk about the authentic self, but I'm pretty sure, how difficult was it to maintain
Oh.
your blackness,
Mm.
in all its form, right? Keeping your hair natural.
Mm.
I don't see nobody with no whole heap of makeup on. You
Mm-mm.
know, I know Neka and Precious. I see that they dress very well. They don't wear no black suit. Exactly, right. They're always dressed in their colors. Like, that must have been hard though, like as black women, to maintain complete authenticity to that level. I
Oh
must
yeah.
not even know in Jamaica, because I mean I lived and worked there, how
So I was
difficult that could
right. So
also
I
be.
was gonna say that my experience, perhaps, my experience may be different from the experience of Nika and say Precious, because I live in Jamaica. I live in the Caribbean, where there's almost this expectation and reverence for locks and natural hair. And so, I mean, and there isn't a huge, I never felt this immense pressure to look any different, to
Mm.
process my hair. I mean, I've had comments, and I've had colleagues older than me talk about their bosses who have had things to say about their hair. But I've never, I've, no, not, let me not say never, but I haven't experienced any kind of pressure to show up another way physically.
Mm,
Mm.
I've experienced pressure to show up in other ways, in terms of compromising who I am. But physically, my locks, my hair, whether I chose to wear makeup or not, I've never experienced that. I've always, as far back as I can remember, felt very special to have natural hair.
Mm.
But normal at the same time, if that makes any sense, because a
Mm.
number of persons around me would have looked like this, would
yeah.
have had locks and that sort of thing. And so, um, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, that wasn't a pressure that I had to grapple with on top of the other things. Right. But
Mm.
I know that might be
Oh.
different for Nika and Precious. I know that might
Oh,
be a bit
Neka.
different for you guys.
It's been a journey.
Yeah.
So,
Neka, I'll let you go first on that one.
Yeah, there's so many things that we're talking about here that it's just, I almost wish like I had known myself now 10, 12 years ago. There's
Mm.
something in that, and it comes with experience, it comes with knowing yourself, and that
yeah.
takes time. And I think that, so when I started, I had relaxed hair. There was no way ever in my mind that I was going to have my natural hair. It wasn't even a concept that I
Yeah.
considered. So,
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
and it wasn't something that was said explicitly, but I looked around me. It was what seemed obvious. And the other
Yeah.
thing was the narrative around natural hair within our community. Oh, it's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
tough to look after, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. So for me, it wasn't even something I considered. I just thought, okay, I've got my straight hair. I'm just going to continue to what I feel is damage it chemically as I continued. So it was only and that's by the way, that's fine. Like if people relax their hair, that's great. My twin has relaxed hair. It's everyone's personal journey, but for me
Yeah.
it was damaging my hair. But after a while, even with color and what I was wearing, became more bold. And it wasn't me trying to make a statement. It was actually me saying, I like this color and I'm going to wear it, even if it looks slightly, it doesn't conform to the uniform in the City of London.
Mm.
But I got to the point probably about 5-6 years ago, and I was like, I love, the natural hair movement was coming back. I just love the styles. I'm one of those people who loves natural hair. I see it, I want to touch it, I want to style it.
Mm.
And it was a journey to learn about my hair, the process. I learned so much about natural hair and what it means, and how it's just me. I didn't feel the need to continue to present a different version of myself. So it is a journey. I really don't feel like it's something that I would have done from day one. Even if
Mm.
I started my career today again and with more women wearing natural hair, I might see it as more of an option. But I'm not saying I would have
Mm.
jumped to that level of
Right, right.
confidence to say it's my hair. Or people say, oh, you've got, sometimes I do an updo and they're like, ooh, you've done something nice to your hair today. It's just a
That is
ponytail.
so
You're
true.
giving me a
Exactly.
ponytail. So
Just
those are
a-
the things that, like, the conversations that you have to have. And like, but to be honest, the world has moved on especially over the past 2 years, and there's more understanding, but you still need to be comfortable with who you are and like what it
yeah.
means for you to be able to turn up and show up in the way you'd want to.
Yeah.
Mm. So, I mean, I'd completely echo. Rasheen, I wish I'd had that experience where,
Yeah, like
everybody
I've
else
never had processed
really didn't.
hair. I don't
You know
even
what I
know
mean?
what it feels like to be like, oh, should I? I don't.
Exactly. Exactly. So my experience is very similar to Neka's. I too had processed hair and I wore the weaves. I have no problem. People can wear their weaves. I wore
Mhm.
a wig. And I got to a
Wow.
point where I was like, I, it wasn't me anymore. And I think it also comes as much, you mentioned it, just being comfortable in your own skin. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the natural hair movement has gained so much momentum and also I think a level of maturity. So people can't see it on here, but I'm pretty much gray, right? So my hair's pretty gray. I'm not that old either. I'm
I mean,
still
they
young.
can log on to the
I'm
YouTube channel and they'll be able to see.
yeah, I'm still a young chicken, but I'm embracing my grace. So
And you rock it. Like,
I
seriously, you rock it.
thank you.
Yeah.
So I had to go over the natural hair, hurdle, and then the gray hair hurdle, and then
Mm,
people asking me. So people have seen profile pictures of me with the weave or whatever it is, and then I dropped that, and then oh, your hair's really different, and then now it's consistent. This is who I am. Precious shows up exactly the same as she did 6 months ago. That whole conversation of, oh, how long did your hair take to do? It doesn't happen anymore. And it was a
yeah,
burden. I think if I felt it was such a burden in the corporate world where, you have to explain your hair all the time. None of our female white colleagues had to explain if they changed their hair from blonde to red. But there was always
right,
an expectation that as a black woman, you have to keep explaining your hair. It's who I
right.
am. I can wear a blonde
Mm,
wig, red wig, whatever. It's my hair, but there's that expectation as a black woman that we constantly have to explain. Neka, you said putting your hair up, it's still your hair, but
Mm.
there's an explanation that needs to happen, and
right,
I feel in a sense that yes, people have come a long way, but I think there's still a long way to go in
right,
people accepting us. And I think the only reason why it's moved a long way is because a lot of us have said, take it or leave it. I'm coming with my
Mm.
hair.
mm,
And a lot more of the younger stock we've given them that confidence to say, look, show up the way you want to show up. We
Yeah.
didn't have that. The narrative, like Neka said, if you were working in corporate London, you had to look a certain way because you'd stick out like a sore thumb.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it
Mm.
was absolutely inauthentic to the way we wanted to present. And maybe there was fear as well, like you said, Neka. Natural hair
Yeah.
was hard. I'm not going to
Yeah.
comb this hair every morning to
Yeah.
get the train.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah. Yeah.
the products were not really our products. How am I
Yeah.
going to comb my hair? What? I went
Exactly.
6:58 train to get,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a little bit older than Rasheen, and I remember Rasheen that you are basking in a new era when it comes on to
Mm.
locks, because back in my days,
You're
when
right.
when you couldn't turn up at not my mother's or grandmother's house with locks, even as a
Wow.
male, right? Worse, a female, right? It was
Really?
Mm.
unheard of
Mm.
for you to do that, and
Right.
back in the days in Jamaica, it wasn't it was the relaxing, but it was more so the pressing comb. So they put
Oh,
this comb
yes,
on
Okay.
this
pressing comb.
thing,
Yeah, that's
heat
true.
it,
Mhm.
and
You
I
comb it
always
through and
thought,
straighten the hair.
yeah, and I
Right.
always thought that must be hot, right?
Sizzling.
You
Exactly.
know, that must be hot. So a lot of people just wouldn't understand some of the nuances that Black women in particular
Yeah.
have to deal with, in the workplace. I mean, what are some of the challenges though that you think that as a Black female leader you are able to overcome? Like, if you could name one major challenge that you overcome in your career, what do you think that would be, apart from the authenticity um
Mm. Yeah.
situation?
I, I mean, one of the things that I don't know if I've fully overcome it yet, but this perception of what assertiveness looks like, I think, is
Mm.
something that is
Mhm.
interesting. I had a specific incident with one of my former employers where
Mm,
I felt that because I was being quite assertive, and I am I'm quite high on the assertiveness scale. I was never like that before. I used to Rasheen's point before, I'd, keep quiet, wouldn't let my voice stand out too much and so on. But now I feel like if there's a point to be made around the values of a business, because the more senior you get,
Mhm.
I think it's more important that you're true about your role in being a leader in that business. When you're junior, you can point to, oh, the seniors don't really understand, they're doing this. And actually, the more senior you get, you have to take ownership of leading the business
Right.
as a whole. And I
Right.
think that in those circumstances, there are times where you have to have uncomfortable conversations and be quite assertive about the
Yeah.
points you're trying to make to land that message. Now, the reason I feel that it's a challenge is because it can come across sometimes as more assertive than if a male counterpart does the same thing or says the same thing, and
Yeah.
perhaps even a more aggressive way. But there's something around, ooh, you're a bit sassy. Ooh, you're quite,
mm,
don't
Yeah.
throw a tantrum. And I'm someone
Yes.
who's quite mild. I'm quite moderate. I never lose my temper. So for someone to use, or people to use that language, partly because I'm expressing a view that's, I feel quite strongly about, okay,
Strong
fairness
rebel.
within the business and so on. Are we making decisions that are fair when it comes to promotion and so on? Are we showing biases and so on? So I feel like that's something that I am more comfortable with now than I used to be, in terms of just expressing my opinion, whether it comes across as super assertive or not. But I need to be able to leave the office and go to sleep with a clear conscience. Some
Mm.
people can
Mhm.
do all sorts and say contradictory things between people and so on and go to sleep. That's not
Mm.
me. I admire them that they can do that, but that's just not me. I would not be able to sleep with having three different opinions that I've shared across the office. So I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things for me. It's how do
Mhm.
you continue to bring people along with you, but still make sure that you express yourself in a way that the message lands.
Mm.
mm,
Mm. I think
yeah.
that's a really important point, actually, in terms of assertiveness. The word that comes to mind for me, and it was talked about at an Inspiring Women in Engineering and Construction, courage. So for me, it's courage, because
Mhm.
that's the one thing that I know I have gained in my leadership journey up till this point, because like you say, shying away, it comes to sort of being a courageous leader. When I talk about courageous leadership, I'm talking about actually anybody that is under my wing. I, in the pinnacle of my career working for somebody, I was very protective, and I'd speak for the people that I was possibly leading. So being that courageous leader, and courage even comes in the sense of actually being slightly vulnerable as well with your team,
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
saying, look, I don't know what this is. You're really good at this. Actually, you're really good at what you do. You run with that.
Mm,
So I now have let go, and then I think we touched on it earlier on. Courage, just letting go of some of the stuff that you don't have to show up and act like you need know everything.
mm,
Early on in the career, that was the case. If you're like, "Ooh, I'm going to be shown up. Now it's actually, I don't really know it. Somebody else is
Mm-hmm.
better at doing
mm,
it.
Yeah.
I'm happy to say, I'm courageous enough to say I don't know it, and I'm courageous to say I'm going to stand for somebody, like what you just said, Neka, being
mm,
assertive and actually standing for the values. So courage for me is something that has come through from that.
mm,
Yeah, Rasheen, what about you?
Me, yeah, there have been a few challenges so far, but what sticks out in my mind as we're speaking, at the university here, the University of the West Indies, it is, even though a really high percentage, most of our students here are female. I think
Yeah,
I think it's like maybe 70-30 by
70.
now,
Yeah,
just about.
yeah,
But at the top, the senior management of the university, the
Mm,
face of our senior management is male.
yeah.
Just like, I mean, I think
it's
on
no
our senior
different.
management, I
Yeah,
mean, honestly, and I feel like it's probably the same for you where you are,
yeah,
Precious and Nick.
it
So,
is.
but I remember when I was um, interviewing for this position that I'm currently in, and my panel, it was a large panel. Two women sat on the panel, but they were relatively quiet. And the head honchos were interviewing me, and so we went through the university that is also is a university, so they're quite big on, I guess, the academic side of things too. So
Mm-hmm.
even though
Mm-hmm.
we're in student affairs, it's important, certainly for some of the previous leaders that have come out of the system. They were really big on demonstrating that student affairs is also a learned profession. It's a discipline and so on.
Mm,
And so they would have ensured that persons coming into the space were studying accordingly. So I just want to create that context. And so I would have done the requisite studies, and I was now interviewing. I was ready for this current position, and I was interviewing, and thought that the interview process was going quite well. And the one of the gentlemen said to me, and I want to be careful about, I almost said his name, his position right now, and I want to be careful because I respect people's office. And he said, you know what? I'm listening to you. You sound great. You're very didactic, I feel. And I don't think you can manage this role. I think you would serve us better in the academy. I
mhm,
feel like this role between, your youth and just basically he's saying at the local level, on the ground, he doesn't feel like I could manage it. And I mean, I guess for me, what I heard was that it's a man's job because there are
Yeah,
some parts of it that will require, for example, there's an aspect of the job that requires me managing the campus's shuttle bus system,
mm,
which I guess traditionally a male has managed it, even though the person before me that managed it was female, but she was much older. And I felt myself shrink in that moment,
mm,
and even after successfully passing through the interview process and getting the post, even in the job, I felt as if I wasn't worthy to handle the position. And so there was quite a bit of self-work. I think it was Precious who
mm,
mentioned earlier the leading of the self and some of the work that you have to do inside, internally, to
yeah,
be
yeah.
able to lead in the way that I know I can. I really had to
yeah.
respond, take some time day by day to respond to some things that were said to me in the interview, and trying
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm.
respond to those daily and respond to them in a way that um talked back to what some of the interview persons thought was truth, that I don't think you
Mm.
can manage this post. I think that you're too nice and sweet and for the
But
for this
Rashid, I
role.
mean, and not one of the other women on the panel kind of spoke up for you in that moment.
No, no,
No.
no. I spoke up for myself actually, because luckily I had been acting in the post for a year. And so
Okay.
what I did in the moment was remind the panelists that I've been doing this for a year and I was doing it through COVID. And I mean, for lack of a better place, the roof isn't falling.
Yeah.
I managed well, and I led as best as I could in a pandemic. And so I
I mean,
went through the gamut of things that I had been
Mm.
doing and had been doing successfully. Um, you know, yeah.
I mean, it's being a black woman, like being a black male, like okay, the only thing we have to really deal with is that we're black.
Yeah.
But being a black woman
Woman,
is that you're
second
black
class citizen,
and
maybe
you're a
third
Oh,
woman,
one.
right?
absolutely.
So it's
Yeah.
not already women are seen as second class, but then
Mm.
you become black and then you move to fifth class because then you
Yeah,
have a
but,
black male that
yeah,
kind of go before you, right? Like
Yep.
yeah.
and it's kind of surprising though. I mean, how during your journeys have you found, well, first and foremost, Neka, you spoke about, your support network. Like, you know, all of you, what was that support network look like? Were you supported by a lot more women, or were you supported by a lot more males, or none at all? Like, Rashid, I
You want
see
to
kind
open a
of
can of worms? You want to open it? You're ready to open a can of worms, Romeo?
yeah, but that's what this podcast is all about, This podcast is for us to, I Rashid, you should have just named, you should have just called the name. You should have just called the name.
Let me tell you the quote that I heard this week, that any lady that doesn't help another lady up the ladder deserves to be in hell. I read it and I was like, oh,
Oh, I think
Well,
that was
I guess a lot of
Rashid.
us women would be in hell then. I mean,
yeah,
because let's be honest.
absolutely. But
I
Rashida, I
feel
love your,
like
yeah, go on, go on.
my
It's always
facial
good. I
expressions.
loved it. I think you need to go. I think you're first off the block with that facial expression.
Because the truth is that, and I don't know if it's because the space at the top for women that seems so small. There is a reluctance for many women to help another woman, right? I will say to you categorically that one of my biggest disappointments within this space, the student affairs or student services and development, as we still refer to it in the Caribbean, one of my biggest disappointments and hurts has been the lack of mentorship and support by other women within the field that I'm in, right? I have had to seek out mentorship on my own in, I guess, a little, what I would call, not non-traditional ways. So
Right.
podcasts have provided resources for me. Books have provided resources for me. Conversations, articles, that kind of thing. And that has been unfortunate when I work in a space where people have been here for years. They've navigated what student services and development has looked like across a number of years. They've navigated this university space as a woman, and so there is a lot more. The breadth of experience, I feel like, makes their leadership so much more dynamic, and there's so much more that I feel that I could learn from and gain by engaging with some of these women. And it has not happened.
Mm,
It has
mm,
not happened at all. And it has been disappointing. And I think generally that's an issue across the board for women, in whether it's private sector, corporate Jamaica.
yes.
Certainly in academia, I hear it's worse there. I'm not in the academy, but I hear it's even worse there. Super graduate students will tell you that the supervisors, female graduate students who are pursuing doctoral studies or studies at the master's level, who have female supervisors will tell you that it has been just the worst experience that they've ever
Mm.
encountered, you know, and you know, you ask yourself, why is that? I mean, I've told myself that perhaps just because of the construct that we have right now, where, you know, there are so few women at the top, there is this feeling that you don't want to help the other person, or because you struggled so much to get to where you are, you feel that you need to go through your own go through, right? You need to
Yeah.
struggle and do your own thing, just like how I did it. I can't, you know, that sort of thing. But it's almost non-existent in within the space that I work.
Yeah.
It's
Mm.
Yeah.
almost
You know,
non-existent, which is ironic because people will tell you across the globe, globally, student affairs or student services is the heart of the campus. Out of classroom learning, it's the heart of any campus because it kind of makes sense of what students get within the classroom and make them into distinctive human beings to contribute in an impactful way in society. So the work that we do is hard work.
yeah.
Yet I have found some of the meanest experiences within the space. And it's not all bad. I don't want to sound as if, you know,
Mm.
but honestly, it's just been the most contradictory experience of my career.
Mm.
Yeah. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say that it's not so much compartmentalizing, but I definitely have like different support groups. I have,
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I started in consulting, in the first two consulting firms I worked at, I definitely had my peers who were also Black women. And it was almost like a cathartic session, meeting with them, chatting, venting, but also
Mm.
being cheerleaders as well. In terms of sponsors, all my sponsors have always been white men. And I just haven't ever worked with a Black woman who's more senior than me. And that's not to say that they aren't there, it's just within the teams I've worked in. So,
Mm.
from a sponsorship perspective, and those who've given me opportunities, it's been white men,
Yeah.
and not white women, explicitly white
Mhm.
men.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
you know, the thing I would say is I do agree. I think sometimes the point that you made, Rasheen, sometimes women do look out for themselves, and in the same way men do, but some women will look out
Mhm.
for themselves more because there are fewer spaces and so on. But I also sometimes challenge it in the sense of,
Mm.
do we have higher expectations of the few Black women who are there? Because if we think about the journeys we all go through, there's the actual work we do, there's the emotional journey that we go on to challenge and constantly fight and to be ourselves. And on top of
Yeah.
that, we're in the minority. So those we want to bring up and support and mentor, there's a lot of demand of our time. So I'm not
Mm.
saying there's some people who are actively negative. I'm not discounting that. I've come across a couple of people and stories where, you know, Black women or women generally have just gone out of their way to be barriers to others.
Mm.
But there's
Mm-hmm.
some,
Right.
I sometimes feel like, you know, as women generally and as Black women, the amount of pressure we already have to address and deal with, and then so many people want time with us and so on,
Mm.
whether we're actually set up for success at all, because not everyone will ever be happy with
Mm.
the support. We haven't done enough. Think about, at the moment it's Black History Month in the UK. Actually, are there enough Black leaders within, in my business? Definitely not at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'm having to run the events,
Yes.
actually go to the stores, buy the books, order the catering. Like, by the time you've done all of that stuff and you're just exhausted because that's not your day job, right? That's
Mm.
the
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
additional. And then on top of that, you haven't then proactively gone to mentor someone else. I don't
Mm.
know. Sometimes I just feel like we need to take the whole picture in terms of what we're dealing with, because believe it or not, there'll be people who are saying that we're not doing enough for them. That's the shocking thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is,
True.
yeah, that
True.
is the reality. I just think that, you know, with this, I call it my village, you know, you have a village of people that support you. And in as much as everything that both of you have said in the different sectors, financial services, and then we've got, you know, education, higher education, It's
Right.
no different in construction. The narrative is exactly the same in the sense that when I was looking for people to support me, it was more around, again, similar to NECA. I don't know, maybe financial services and construction have got very clear parallels. White males were my sponsors when I had roles that were coming up, either in when I completely changed direction in my career. It was because of a white male that said, look, listen, I think you're great for this role, and he pushed it for me. Can I say that about white females? Absolutely not. I think they are the biggest barrier for a black woman, to be honest with you, and I'll say
Mm.
that openly on this podcast, that they are the biggest barrier, and they should be our allies.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
they should be our allies because they have one element of what we call our double jeopardy of being black and being female. They only have the one strand. So that one
Right.
strand where they've had to fight, they should be really supporting us. But that's a conversation for another day.
I,
But
I
in
mean,
turn,
I don't think it's a conversation for another day because
you want to
if
go
if
that rabbit hole. You really,
no, but seriously,
you really,
so I mean, globally right now, it's there. It's even part of the SDGs, right? The Social
yes,
Development Goals around gender equity, right?
yes, yes.
But does that whole fight around gender equity, um, does it equate to gender equity for Black women? Because when I look at all
It should.
especially here in the UK, they're talking about more women on boards, 50% of this. They're all white women, they're all white
Absolutely,
middle class women, right?
absolutely,
So I mean,
absolutely.
there is no gender equity then, if that is where it's going. It's
Yeah.
white women gender equity then, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's the issue right there, in the sense that, like Neko and Rasheen said, there's a lot of pressure being a black woman who has that leadership role that is seen as a potential mentor, sponsor, whatever it is, because you're still trying to fight your own barriers that are being put by people that are around you.
Makes sense.
So you pick and choose your battles. So your battle is,
Mm.
I've got to look after myself first, for me to look after myself to be better. But Romeo, that whole notion of gender equity does not exist. Absolutely does not exist when it comes
No.
to the same opportunities being given for Black women. Simple example is a conference last week where I actually raised my hand and I said, in a room of about 200 people, and I said, we're talking about gender equity today, but I see nobody that looks like me, yet there are people like me that are capable to sit on this platform and talk about the very issues that you're talking about. And I stood up courageous, that I was talking about courage that I would have never done before, but because it's come to a point where if we cannot make those decisions in that leadership roles that we've been given to show the behaviors that push us to have a seat at the table on that platform, then when we're doing a disservice to the people that will then see that, because it can be in indirect mentorship. Somebody can
Yeah.
see your behaviors as a leader, as
Yeah.
a black woman, and say, do you know what, I want to emulate Neka, I want to emulate Rasheen. I might have never had a conversation
but
with Neka
but
or
but
Rasheen.
couldn't that be where the pressure is coming from? Because there are just so little of you Black female leaders that, like, you're being bombarded from
Told.
every side because there's not
Yep.
enough of you to go
Unfortunately.
around, like,
Yeah,
you
it's
Yeah.
know.
like a shark. It's like a tank with piranhas. You just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
every bit of you is being chewed. But yeah, that's my take on that particular topic.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned. I mean, one of the things that several things came out of this discussion with you guys, and one of the things that jumped out is, how important do you think role modeling is, like, for the younger Black women who are coming into leadership, and and what can other Black women do, to help strike this balance and not feeling as if they're being, so pressured.
Yeah. Mm.
I think
I
doing what we're
feel,
doing now. But Nika, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was going to say that I think that role modeling and using our platforms, not just being there, but using our platforms, I see that as a responsibility. So one of the
Mm,
phrases that my parents always said is, to whom much is given, much is expected.
expected, yeah.
We can't
Mm,
abdicate that
Was that
responsibility
Mark
because,
Twain?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Mhm.
Um,
See?
very good, Romeo. But it's like,
Look how
whilst
precious.
although it's been a journey for us and it doesn't feel like it's been given to us or handed to us on a plate, we are now given a platform. And for us, we need to, there's an expectation. And I see it more as a responsibility rather than expectation. And I think we need to hold ourselves accountable, because if we're not able to show up and role model the behaviors that we want to see, the change will be so superficial.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be some numbers and so on, but actually in 10 years time, 20 years time,
Mm.
people will go back to those same sort of situations that we described, not being comfortable with natural hair, not being comfortable to speak up and so on. So I see that as not just important. It's like, at least for me, I shouldn't say it's for everyone, but I think for me it is a
Mm.
core part of who I am. I'm here to be not to be a role model, but definitely to be myself and to use
Mm.
the platform I have to make the change I believe we need to make. So that's how I would just describe it. I see it as a responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Rasheen?
I
I
mean,
mean,
I learned very quickly.
no, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, Romeo. Okay, I learned really quickly that leadership is about change. I think we all know that. But I also realized that leadership is a lot about influence, and if influencing isn't taking place, I don't know if I would call that leadership. And because of that, you can't help once you're in a leadership position. You actually can't help, nor do you have any control over being a model, being a role model. That's the truth, and there has to be some acceptance about that, and an awareness of that and what that will look like. What that looks like for me is really and truly showing up as myself, which is, and I'm big
Mhm.
on that now, particularly because I have kids and daughters too, who it's important for me to demonstrate showing up in a world as yourself and being proud of that person, imperfect as you are. And so, what that looks like for me is being myself, being imperfect, but opening up the lines of conversation. So, because I work in student affairs or in higher education, I work with a lot of students. I have them interning in my office. They come to do voluntary hours and voluntary service, and I work with them a lot. And I rarely, and this is on a superficial level, but symbolically also, I really do everything in my power to ensure that my door is always open.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And what that
Mm-hmm.
means for me is that at no point should you, it's a vulnerability thing too. So there is a line of communication. So you might not say to me, I am Miss, you are my role model, but I'm aware of that space of influence that
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
in. I have to be aware and, own that space. Yeah. And
Mm.
create lines of communication. I actually, to the point where I actually am uncomfortable sometimes when my door has to be closed, whether for a private session or whether I need a moment. But I leave my door open so students know they can come to the door, they can speak. Even my colleagues, you can come to the door, you can question, you can ask, we can have a conversation. That's important to me. And being vulnerable. I
Mm.
think it was Precious who said earlier, not being afraid to say, I'm actually not sure. My students, just the other day, my student came in and we were trying to send out mass emails, and he was like, hey, Mrs. Rob, you don't know, just do mail merge, something, something. And I was like, mail, huh? And I said, come
Absolutely.
around. I said, come around, come in, come around my desk, come catch beside me and show me what you're talking about. And he was
Yes.
able to demonstrate exactly what he meant. And in that moment, you kind of saw the smile slash smirk on his face, just like, I'm in Mrs. Rob's office around her computer type thing, right? This is not a space that I'm hugging up and I'm restricting and I'm creating walls and barriers around. There is an openness that's important to me, a vulnerability of, I'm not sure how to do that. You know what to do, come and show me, and so on. And I feel like So one, an awareness of that space of influence, and that by default, as a leader, you're a model, but creating lines of communication and openness for exchange to take place,
Yeah.
questions to be asked and answered, vulnerability to be shown and not hidden, imperfections to be on display, but kind of like an acknowledgement that that is okay.
Yeah.
And lastly, just that demonstrating that a huge part of leadership has to do with growing and
Yeah.
learning, and being open to change. So an
And
awareness of all of that.
it's important for those lines of communication for people to
Absolutely.
Yeah,
feel a sense of safety, that
Yeah.
they are in a safe space, that
safe.
they can,
Yeah, yes,
yes,
Yeah.
they can
yeah.
actually
Yeah.
precious.
Well, I think Rasheen and Necker pretty much nailed it. But I liked what Rasheen said
Oh,
was
hold on, Precious. Just before you move on, just for
yeah.
the listeners, when Rasheen earlier said "coach," what she means that the
Oh,
person came beside her. So
I f-
let me
do you,
translate that. Let me translate it.
do you
I was
know
trying
what?
to translate that.
No, do you know I speak to
What's that,
Romeo all
Becca?
the time. I figured it out. But yeah, Necker,
No, I said I was trying
yes.
to
Thank you for
translate
that.
it.
Thank you for that, Romeo. That's what it is. That's an
hey,
important clarification to
global
make. Yes.
leadership, hey.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
my goodness. But yeah, no, influence. I think I really like what you said about influence, understanding the influence that you have, because role
Mhm,
modeling comes when you're aware of it and when you're not aware of it, because people
mhm,
will see
mhm.
you when you're not when you don't realize that you're being seen. So I think it's just Neka, you touched on being authentic. You touched
Yeah.
on Rasheen, you touched on just understanding influence and having open lines of communication. There's nothing more I can add to that, because that's exactly how I view role modeling. And also it's just being that vulnerability piece is so important. People don't realize the power of just showing up as your whole self and people seeing you for who you are. Because people
Yeah,
connect with people. They don't connect with the term leader. They connect with Rasheen. They connect with Neka and Romeo and Precious. So just being who you are, I think a lot of people will come and they'll resonate and say, look, I really like the way you spoke, or I really like the way you dressed, or how do you do your hair? There's so many
Yeah.
ways of
yeah,
role modeling.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
leader
absolutely.
in so many spheres. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think
You've just listened to part 1 of a part 2 series featuring phenomenal Black women in leadership roles. The second part is coming up next. Please stay tuned.